The Game of Thrones in general is a game of cronyism because it's all about forming political alliances, especially with people who can make you better off economically speaking.
I'm Tracy Oppenheimer for ReasonTV, and today we're talking with Matt McCaffrey. He's an instructor at Auburn University and a fellow at the Mises Institute. Matt, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
So you've written about Game of Thrones lately and the economics and politics that go along with the book series as well as the HBO series. And we all love Game of Thrones for the sex, action, and gore, but I think part of what makes it so engaging is that the politics and economics connect the realm to reality. You talk about how there are some historical underpinnings to the economic system.
George Martin, when he writes his books, he actually does a lot of historical research to try and get the tone and the feeling of the sort of medieval setting right. And to do that, apparently, he does a lot of research into sort of the more economic aspects of just how you run a kingdom, or in his case, 7 kingdoms maybe. As part of his process, he ends up sort of uncovering a lot of historical details that would usually get lost in a fantasy book of this kind, just practical difficulties of running a kingdom, how public finance works, how the Game of Thrones corrupts the people who play it, and how it ends disastrously for the people who don't play it well.
Whoever's sitting on the throne, they figure out that there's 3 ways to control the state's finance. There's borrowing, taxation, and inflation. And I think they use all 3 of these. Can you talk about borrowing first, and how, especially in times of war, this is particularly relevant?
Yeah, well, this is a huge problem for the Lannisters especially, as they attempt to finance this seemingly endless war against all the other, they would like to believe, pretenders to the throne. So what they have to do is, of course, war is extremely expensive, and so they borrow heavily, usually from foreign banks, from the so-called free cities, who are sort of off on the sidelines in the story. But of course, they find out very quickly that borrowing is extremely difficult, especially if there's a risk that you're not going to be paying back your loans. And of course, all the foreign banks are very worried that they're going to lose the war. And so they charge exorbitantly high rates of interest, and it becomes increasingly difficult for the Lannisters to pay back their debts. One of their other chosen methods of public finance is coin clipping. This is a practice that goes back long before the Middle Ages, actually, but it was particularly popular in the Middle Ages, and it's a process of inflating the money supply by debasing the coinage. And so the Lannisters are behind the scenes, especially Littlefinger, the master of coin, is engaged in this activity and is actually increasing the money supply by producing debased coins.
Cersei says at one point that she wishes they just had a Bank of Lannister. Is there anything to be taken from that?
I definitely think so, because the drive to produce a central bank is, of course, one of the logical economic outcomes of government finance. They continually need new sources of finance because you can't tax people forever, you can't borrow forever. Then your third option is to create money, and especially to create a central bank that you can use to finance your activities, and that's what the Lannisters want to do.
We do see a lot of cases of taxation, even sin taxes to pay for Joffrey's lavish wedding.
This tax is what they call the dwarf's penny, and it's a tax on prostitution that the Lannisters enact, because they have many shrewd taxation strategies where they, for things like sin taxes, where they can be reasonably sure that that demand for the product will be stable.
And more broadly speaking, I mean, this is sort of the epitome of cronyism. Do you see any other examples of that?
Well, of course, the Game of Thrones in general is a game of cronyism because it's all about forming political alliances, especially with people who can make you better off economically speaking. So, for example, in the recent season, we've seen an alliance between the Lannisters and the Tyrells. The Tyrells are one of the most economically powerful families, and so now they're trying to curry favor with the crown. And at the same time, even before the Lannisters were in control, you have someone like Tywin Lannister, who's a very wealthy man who is financing basically all of the crown's activities when Robert Baratheon is king. And it's very clear that there's an exchange being made there, that Tywin Lannister has real control and is really steering their government simply through his power as a financier.
Do we ever see an example of capitalism and it prevailing?
It's interesting because you do have what are called the free cities, which are a group of cities that are not on the central continent. And Some of them are slave cities, so they're actually the opposite of free, but some of them do appear to be sort of thriving commercial centers. There's a lot of trade going on. Karth would be an example of this, is a city that appeared in the second season of the television show. It seems to be at least free relative to some of the kingdoms in Westeros, and they do seem to thrive based on their economic success.
Matt, thanks so much.
Well, thank you again for having me.
For Reason TV, I'm Tracy Oppenheimer.